Hello. I'm here to have a personal conversation with you about active nonviolence. Let's talk about just 3 things. First, an overview of active nonviolence. Second, some strategies and tactics that we could use to engage in active nonviolence. And third, how we can work towards a balanced spirituality of active nonviolence in our everyday lives. Let me begin with a story that's 35 years old, but it's, I think, very applicable even today. This is a story, and I thank him. This is the story of Rene San Andres, our current director of the Ateneo Residence Halls. It was a story of EDSA when the Jesuit novices went to EDSA during People Power 1. That was in February 1986. And he actively led some civilians during People Power. So imagine the setting on the corner of Boni Serrano and Katipunan Extension, that corner there. I think many of you siguro pass this place, this area coming from Makati and going to school, going to Ateneo. So on one side, we have military troops armed with M16, with Armalites, and some had M30 machine guns and bazookas. And then on the other side, there were civilians who were quietly seated on the ground, civilians and religious, and there was a leader with a megaphone saying, "Pinaglalaban natin ang mahal nating bayan." And the leader also remind them to do kapit bisig this way, no? The kapit bisig was to let them be solidly united so that just in case the troops charge, they wouldn't just fall down or disperse. They would also occasionally sing the Ama Namin in prayer. Now, just a side story to this story. At one point, imagine the civilians and religious seated 6 rows in front of the troops. At one point, the troops started throwing canisters of tear gas. So when the tear gas just erupted among the civilians, somehow the 3 lines at the back dispersed. And there were 3 lines remaining, and then according to Rene's story, they decided to go back, to leave that place and to regroup somewhere else. But that was not really a big problem because behind them were some buses that were also blocking the way, so the troops couldn't go forward. And to add to that interesting event, when the troops threw the tear gas, the wind blew towards the troops. And fortunately, or unfortunately for them, wala pang COVID noon, so they didn't wear face masks. And so the tear gas sort of like went around the troop area. And so there was a standoff. That's the end of the story for now. Now, that's an event that showed how people can be actively nonviolent in the face of highly militarized attacks. Let's trace back the history, a very, very short history of active nonviolence. It sort of starts historically. It comes into the forefront of the world stage with Mahatma Gandhi, when he led the Indians against the occupation of the British in India. And let's listen to our leader, our ANV role model. He said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." And he wasn't the only one who pushed for active nonviolence. In more recent times, we have our beloved Cardinal Sin, who called the civilians to EDSA during People Power 1 in 1986. Cardinal Sin says, "Strength without compassion is violence. Justice without love is Marxism. And love without justice is baloney." Now, we have a third role model, Martin Luther King. And his life is, again, something to emulate, and his words are still remembered by those who are struggling now against racism in the United States, who are in this Black Lives Matter movement. And Martin Luther King says, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So just briefly, nonviolence, as we see here, it has a variety of meanings. It's derived from Sanskrit words. Ahimsa means no harm, non-harm. Satyagraha means satya is force or strength, so it needs some kind of power. And graya is truth or soul. So it's a power, it's a soul kind of power. What are the features of active nonviolence? First, it derives strength from both external collective strength and internal spiritual rootedness. It produces nonviolent social strain to change unjust social conditions. That's the second one. Third, the third feature is that A and V is collective. It's not singular. So we need to network, to mobilize, and to conscientize. And fourth, the protest against social deceit and abuses is in the public sphere. It's not only in private conversations or chat groups. It's out in the public. Now, what are some strategies and tactics that might help us get through this active nonviolent protest? We imagine it can go from mild to strong. If the mild doesn't work, it can go a bit not so mild, and then it can become very strong. On the mild end, we have nonviolent protest and persuasion. Here is when public collective actions which voice peaceful opposition to a policy or a law are said out loud in the public sphere. For example, protest rallies or Facebook public protest posts. Recent examples are, let me see, maybe Rappler's truth-telling, Inquirer editorials against extrajudicial killings, Senator Laila de Lima's open criticism of our government's strong-headed ways, and Father Jed Villarine's statement against the forced shutdown of ABS-CBN last May 2020. Now, all these protests and persuasions try to diminish the legitimacy and power of the opponent. But if they don't work, we can escalate that a bit to non-cooperation. So from protest to non-cooperation, which is a stronger form of A and V. Non-cooperation entails stronger actions which involve refusal to do things that are normally done to help a person, group or institution, or a government, which one is trying to be in conflict with and to pressure to change. An example that comes to my mind is during martial law days, we boycotted the government cronies businesses. Like when we were doing anti-Marcos protests, Cory Aquino called for a boycott of San Miguel products because the company was at that time owned by Marcos crony Danding Coangco. God bless his soul. God bless their souls. Now, the strongest kind of, let's go to the third kind of A and V tactic. The first is protest and persuasion, then non-cooperation, and in the end, it's non-violent intervention, where we interrupt an ongoing activity or process of the opponent. For example, when the A and Vers on EDSA just sat down, when the Marcos troops were charging, they just sat down on the highway. And behind them, the buses, they just stayed there and blockaded EDSA. So they interrupted the ongoing process of the Marcos troops charging. Let me give you one very recent example. In May of 2017, Bishop Ambo David of Caloocan addressed his parishioners in the diocese, and especially those affected by EJK, and he said, if you are part of my diocese, and if you want your stories to be documented with the hope of being able to eventually file a case with the court, with the help of volunteer lawyers, and no expense, please visit your parish priest. The priest will advise you what to do and how to do it. So that is a kind of intervention, a kind of legal intervention using the courts to stop EJKs. Now, let's go to ways by which we can produce these strategies and tactics in an effective yet humane and spiritually deep way. If we look at the screen, the line goes from mild to strong interventions. On the mild end of A and V, the power source for that is external strength. The skills needed are conscientizing, networking, mobilizing, and now, today's world, mass communication skills, like the people here, who know how to use social media and how to use communication. Where are these skills learned? Usually, these skills are learned on the streets and on those who are good at communication and in social media. But as we go from mild confrontations to stronger ones, iba na yung usapan. The power source for that becomes more internal without letting go of the external strengths. Becomes more internal and spiritual. What skills are these? Management of internal emotions, to change from fear to courage, from anger toward the transgressor to love of the victim, from being impatient to change things to patience with the self, with others, and with the situation, and from ideological right-use pride to firm humility, and from despair to hope. Here we have to dig into ourselves to get these kinds of changes within us. Where are these additional skills learned? Nowadays, I could say just offhand, maybe in church-based movements and in moderate social movements who are discerning and supporting each other in small groups. Okay, now let's see how we can work towards a balanced spirituality for active nonviolence. To have a balance between what? Balance between what is inside us and what is outside us, where strength comes from both inside and outside. Now, this balance for developing what is inside us, one needs to be consistent between public enunciations and one's own private morality. One also has to be mellowness of heart and soul, to be fueled by gratitude, not anger and bitterness. But internal strength is definitely not enough for active nonviolence. One has to know how to produce power in the external environment. One requirement is to have a goal for social justice. Always think of that. How do we produce social justice in this situation? And another feature that would strengthen this kind of spirituality is one's acknowledgement that one needs to get involved and committed in the public sphere. Public, not private sphere only. But we can be outbalanced or imbalanced as we work towards a spirituality of nonviolence. This is natural. We're only human. This is a struggle of humans, not of angels, not of saints. So sometimes we go towards over-internalizing our meanings of peace. And we disregard our external struggles and the demands of the external world. So this kind of imbalance puts us in situations where we find ourselves, consistent with our public enunciations and private morality. Maybe we have really good personal moral integrity and we are honest. And we also have mellowness of heart and soul. But there's no social justice desire. One can say, scripts of this could be, I often pray for our country. I pray for the poor. Politics is too dirty for me. The individual well-being of the poor doesn't matter in the bigger picture. The police are just doing their jobs. Or, we could also say, in this kind of imbalance where there's too much internal concentration, we can say, talking, criticizing our government in private conversations is more than enough. Wag na sa public. Ang daming may topak sa anti-government movements or anti-government groups are so disorganized, so weak, so self-interested. So, we could go to the other side of the imbalance where there's too much over-externalizing of the struggle of peace and we disregard internal struggles. Here, we find people who are social justice stalwarts. They're at the forefront of social justice struggles and they are committed and involved in the public sphere. But there's not too much attention to what is going on internally. For this kind of imbalance, we can hear words or narratives like, I am too busy for sacred silence. Or political effectiveness against our government also requires immoral acts on my part. Anyway, no one will know I'm doing this. Or what's wrong with having sex with many women? Helps reduce my stress. Or something like, I am so wounded and tired. EJKs are so rampant. Our government is so bad. My anger and bitterness are justified. I will let others carry my cross of anger and bitterness. So in summary, the political psychology of active nonviolence is political because it engages with social power. It's psychological because it involves personal and collective mental processes and behaviors. It's active because it acts upon conditions of massive deceit and distress. And it is nonviolent. It does no harm. It does not kill. Let me end with a prayer prayed by El Salvador Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was murdered while he was saying Mass in El Salvador. One must not love oneself so much as to avoid getting involved in the risks of life that history demands of us. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something, and to do it very, very well. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and worker. We are workers. We are not master builders. Ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future that is not our own.